Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I'm your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and God, what? Matt, you punched me in the eye. Why, Matt?
And I'm King Newbie Matt Freeman, and sorry, Scott, it's better if you don't see it coming.
You know, they do that in movies and books a lot, and I'm always like, I don't know if it's actually better if I don't see it coming.
Yeah, I'm like, have you ever been hit in the face, actually? Because... yeah.
Let's plan this and let's organize it and decide where the best part of the face to be hit is.
Yeah. Like, what if you hit me in a way where it's not even going to make a bruise, but it just hurts a lot?
Yeah. If you hit me in like the ear, for example.
Yeah.
This week on the show, we're going to be chatting all about Chapter 11 of Salem's Lot, the chapter titled Ben 4. The vampire hunting Ka-tet recruits another member as Jim Cody and Ben Mears do battle with a vampire Mama Glick. Also, Susan does something really stupid. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
Well, I'm beyond thrilled that we have our new Ka-tet member, Jim Cody. He's great. I love him. So happy to see him. He really brings a fun new kind of element into the dynamic, actually. And then we get some really great scenes with him.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about with him. I kind of love, one of the things we're going to spend a lot of time on is the way in which he gets on board incredibly faster than any other character in the story so far.
Right, exactly. That's one of the ways in which he adds a new dynamic, and it's well timed too. I think we're going to go into the fact that it's like if we had to go through a whole nother argument, that would be a bit much. But no, he's like, yeah, sure. Okay.
Checks out to me. Let's go kill a vampire. Yep. Yeah, no, I agree. I'm having so much fun with this book. This chapter itself is a lot of fun. I love the ways in which the chapter's titled Ben, but I think one of the interesting things about this book so far is that King hasn't necessarily felt completely beholden to the chapter title thing. We talked about this earlier, when we were talking about prologues and how George R. R. Martin has the chapters are named after the point of view character, and we stay locked with that point of view character the whole chapter. We do not leave it. This is a chapter called Ben. We leave Ben behind and go hang out with Susan for about half the chapter. So I kind of like that he's not restricting himself. Like, he can call the chapter whatever, but he allows himself to journey everywhere.
Yeah, it's not strict, but the main sort of arc, the main focus is the character. But I agree. Yeah. I like it.
Yeah. All right. So before we get into our deep discussion of this week's reading, we do have some quick announcements. The first one is that our other show that Matt and I host together called The Doofcast is a variety show where we review movies and television and a bunch of other things. We're having a couple fun episodes coming up, Matt. Last week we talked about Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. That was for our Council of Doof episode where we kind of allow our patrons to select movies for us that we hope to get nominated for some of the best films of all time, the Doof canon, and some of our patrons nominated Star Trek II, and we talked all about that. And then this week's episode, this coming Friday, will be us finishing our Pirates trilogy. We're doing a deep dive series on Gore Verbinski and all his films. And so we're finishing up the third Pirates film that he directed, his final Pirates film. And they made no more Pirates films after that. So perfect. So if you want to listen to us talk about Star Trek 2 or Pirates 3 at World's End, make sure you guys check out the Doofcast.
Yeah, and I just a little spoiler for that one. I liked Pirates 3 more than I remembered liking it.
Yay! So I'm so excited.
This will be a really fun conversation. We haven't actually had the conversation yet, but I anticipate that it will be fun.
I watched the movie today though, and I adored it. It's so good. And so we'll get into it.
Yeah. The other quick just reminder for everyone. Last week we announced the Do the King Thing short fiction contest. You're going to have to look at the full rules. I'm not going to go into all of them again, but those should be on the description for this episode. And we really can't wait to see what people submit, because I think it's a really fun idea. And I know that some of y'all out there are talented writers.
Yeah, definitely. We've already gotten a few submissions, so people are definitely excited to participate in this. And we have gotten a few questions. Some people have submitted and then said, what if I edit it later? And you have until the deadline. So if you've already submitted and you decide, I wanted to change something or I want to submit something else, just email us that and we'll swap out your submission. So if you want to take the whole month, take the whole month. If you want to submit it right now, that's fine. Do you guys, but we're really excited. I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we're looking forward to your submissions.
Yes. If you are confused and have no idea what we're talking about, it is in the show notes. That link is in the show notes. So check out the rules and the prizes and the details and go write something King-esque.
Yeah, it's 2,000 words max, which is not a whole lot. So it's really not that much of an investment to write that.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. We did the 2,000 words because this whole contest is done in partnership with our Do the Right Thing partner podcast, and they do stories that they write in half an hour. So we wanted this to be a short, little, quick story. I think it's almost one of those limitations breed creativity things as far as this contest goes. Like you have to tell a complete story in 2,000 words. It's challenging, but fun, I think.
It forces you to get to the point.
Yeah, very, very true. Stephen King would be like, what? No. That's not true. He has some incredible short fiction. But
yeah.
Not this book. Speaking of which, are you ready to get into Salem's Lot, Matt?
Let's do it.
All right, let's start with our chapter this week. Only one chapter this week, chapter 11, Ben 4. Our chapter starts with Ben being extremely nervous about the health and well-being of Susan as he wakes up in the hospital, which is, I think, a fitting way to start things off, considering what happens in the rest of the chapter, especially to Susan.
Yeah, there's definitely a solid arc to this chapter because we begin with Ben being concerned for Susan and then not succeeding in getting her to take the danger seriously, and then ending with him being concerned for Susan having failed to get her to take the danger seriously.
Yeah, and of course he doesn't know what's happened to her. I do find it interesting. This is one of those things that, like, this story would need to be dramatically changed if it were written in 2021, because he would just call her cell phone or text her or anything. And like he goes through this whole big thing and then just goes to bed at night and doesn't even know if Susan's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll talk about that when we get there, but he could at least call her house. But
yeah, I thought about that too.
Yeah. But he's tired, he's had a rough day.
Yeah. The other big news, though, is Matt is awake. And therefore, it's time for our trio, our Ka-tet of 3, to assemble for the very first time. And what do? Well, they talk about if they believe in vampires or not. And I wanted to talk to you about this, Matt, because a couple weeks ago, we talked about how basically we had these great chapters where our characters were really wrestling with whether or not they believed what was going on. And one of the things we talked about was this idea of if an author spends too long on this whole characters doubting a thing that we, the readers, already know is 100% real, then it can start to get boring. And I'm curious if you've reached that point with this novel at this point, or why or why not.
Yeah, the answer is no. I did not find this to be tedious. I think it's because there's actually a subtle distinction between the things that we were talking about previously and the things we're talking about now, and where the story was previously and where the story is now. Because here, Matt and Ben are totally on board. Susan's not, but she's not. It's not an argument trying to get Susan to believe. The difficulty is no longer in the frustration of being a step ahead of your characters. Your characters are now on the same page as you. It's a new problem, and that problem is the characters being 100% convinced, but understanding the intractability of convincing the town, the people at large, especially in any kind of reasonable time frame. Because now it's not just what we talked about in the discussion question. It's not just how do you convince your best friend there's a vampire in your house, or how would your best friend convince you there's a vampire in your house. That's way more doable than convincing the sheriff, who you don't know very well, that there's vampires all over town, or trying to convince random people that they need to take action based on this vampire infestation. It's a totally different problem that they're facing, and thus I think it's appropriate that it's a different conversation. And it was still exciting and fun for me. Yeah,
okay, I like that reasoning. That makes a lot of sense to me. I was a little worried about that as we got into this chapter, so I'm glad to see that it hasn't affected you. And I agree. I mean, a lot of this chapter is like, we're constantly thrown up against figures of authority, and which ones of those they feel they're comfortable telling and which they aren't, I think is very telling to what this story is doing. This would be a completely different book if like one of the Ka-tet members was a sheriff or any kind of authority figure.
Well, I think one of the many things that Stephen King is really good at is just knowing whether a scene is dramatic and has dramatic tension to it. And, perhaps since, the first draft of Salem's Lot or whatever, there were more conversations where people were trying to convince each other, because that is an interesting thing, right? This is an interesting idea. Like we have sort of fixated on this last couple of weeks, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's taken a fairly good chunk of this novel.
Yeah, it's a big chunk of the novel. It's a big chunk of what we've talked about. But I imagine that he probably kind of streamlined. This is all supposition, obviously, but I imagine he streamlined it all down to, a few short, relatively contained conversations to try to kind of hit all of the beats that he wanted to hit, and then we move on from that, because he's not going to just wallow and kind of repeat himself.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I really liked this passage, kind of circling around the same idea. This thing right here. It's amazing how hard the mind can try to block out something it doesn't like or finds threatening, like the magic slates we had as boys. If you don't like what you had drawn, you had to only pull the top sheet up and it would disappear. But the line stayed on the black stuff underneath forever, Susan said. Yes, he smiled at her, a lovely metaphor for the interaction of the conscious and unconscious mind. A pity Freud was stuck with onions.
Yeah. Chalkboard would have worked just as well, Freud. Come on.
Yeah, Freud, come on. I don't know, like, I enjoy when the book crafts a metaphor and then tells us it's a metaphor. And I've always kind of enjoyed that. It's not necessarily a winking at the audience, but like it's like characters aware that they're talking in metaphor. I think sometimes authors shy away from this because it seems too textual, but this is how people talk, right? Like when people talk in metaphor all the time, constantly, it's just kind of the way that people interact.
Yeah, especially a character like Matt, who's a a literary guy. It makes total sense that these people would be having this conversation.
Yeah, and of course, I just generally I love the central metaphor. This idea that like there is some unerasable moment when something happens. Like I think Ben is dealing with this, and the moment that he had in the Marston house, they're dealing with this with the truth of the vampires. And I think a lot of our characters have this unerasable, unremovable core, if you want to call it the id feeling, and your unconscious mind. Like I love that construction, the used with a simple toy that kids used.
Yeah, right. And it gets down to that, the idea of the Marston house being like the sort of the psychic stain on the house. Is like the imprint of a ghost in the wood and the stone of the house.
You can fix up the house, you can change out who's living there, but the black stuff remains underneath. Right. I wonder if this is a metaphor that collapses in 50 years when no one knows what the hell these magic slate things are. Yeah.
Nobody has anything else that can't just be erased completely.
Yeah, like there's probably people that are reading this book right now that like were born only like less than 20 years ago that might not even know what these things are. Like I played with this thing as a kid all the time. I'm
not sure if are we talking about like a magnadoodle?
Basically.
Which is like a brand name, right? But I'm like, is there a difference between the thing that I'm thinking of and the thing that they're talking about? I'm not even really sure.
No, it was just like it had a thin piece of paper,
right?
And you drew on the top, and then you could lift the thin piece of paper, and it would remove the drawing from it.
I know what you're talking about.
And there was a thing underneath it. Yeah,
it's funny because I forgot about that. I was kind of picturing like a magnadoodle or an Etch-a-Sketch for that matter. Etch-a-Sketch is similar, where you draw the thing and then you can shake it, but you have to shake it quite a long time to get rid of the image. We used to have a lot of metaphorical toys.
Yes, we did. Not anymore. It's just iPads now. Yeah, you can't make anything out of an iPad.
Yeah, right.
What kind of metaphor would an iPad be?
I know. It's what a bereft world we live in.
So before Susan and Ben catch Matt up on what's going down at the lot while he was recovering from his heart attack, he catches Ben up on what happened at the house. I love the way as Matt kind of mentally preps for the story. I love the way we see his mood shift. Like the scene starts with these three just kind of hanging out. They're happy to see each other doing well. It even describes old man Matt as rejuvenated. But the second he actually is asked to tell his story and go back there, we get this brief moment of Matt's face darkened, and for a moment the mask of convalescence fluttered. Ben glimpsed the old man he had seen sleeping the day before. And I just love this as an image of like, these characters, like you want to see them get to hang out and be happy. And then like the truth of the situation keeps like poking in everywhere. And so here's this man that's in a better world. He had a heart attack. He'd recover and be fine. but like, no, there are vampires in town, and this keeps poking through and seeing through that mask of convalescence.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, their level of like felt urgency probably doesn't match the direness of the situation.
Yeah. But regardless of that, Matt powers through his story anyway. He shakes a little, but his voice never wavers. And while the three don't necessarily fully accept that there are vampires in Salem's Lot, they all agree that all other rationalities are out the window, and so they get to work. They get to work, and it's time for a signing of roles. Matt, here we go.
This is so fun.
So Ben is assigned Researcher General, aka the Giles of the Scooby Gang.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to head to the library and get a bunch of information on vampires and stuff like that.
How convenient that he's writing a book and has this excuse.
Well, no, Ben's the one writing the book.
Oh.
Matt's not writing a book.
Oh, wow. Okay, sorry. I missed. So I think the reason why I misunderstood this is because I was like, Matt just had a heart attack. They're really going to send Matt out on an errand?
No, he's just going to call someone and get them to truck him back up here.
Okay, well, I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, which is what the Giles does. And you'd know this if you watch Buffy like a good person.
So he never does anything. But Giles just sits around.
Well, I mean, that's not... Look, I don't want to get into the whole Buffy thing, but in the early seasons, yes, he's the one in the library researching the demons.
Okay,
which is exactly what's going to happen here.
I gotcha.
Ben, for his part, will go and talk to Dr. Cody, filling him in on the whole story, and perhaps getting him to exhume the body of Danny Glick to prove once and for all what's going on.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that will be a really hard sell.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be really strange if, the physician, who Ben doesn't even really know, were easier to persuade than, for example, Susan had been. It would be so strange.
I think you're doing something here. I'm not sure what it is.
Well, we're going to get there.
And what does Susan get to do, Matt? Well, nothing.
Yep.
Susan doesn't... out of all the three of them, Susan is the one that has bought into this the least. She doesn't have the history that Ben has, and she doesn't have the direct experience that Matt has, so she's just not fully sold on this whole thing. She still thinks the quickest way to solve this whole mystery would just be to march up to the suspected vampire's house and say hello. But the other two immediately shoot this plan down because it's a very stupid plan, Susan. It's a bad plan.
Uh-huh.
Don't do that plan, Susan.
What could go wrong, Scott? I mean, but the thing is, it's funny because in their minds, they shot down her plan.
Yeah.
In her minds, they told her it was a bad idea. And then she just kind of went like, well, I'm just going to do it anyway.
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing Susan as a pretty headstrong type of individual who is very proud of her ability to make her own decisions. And we'll talk about that when we get to Susan's unfortunate section of this chapter.
Right.
But,
I mean, I think there's a massive disconnect in communication between Susan and Ben.
yes.
Actually, which has been, it's very subtle. And like, that's what makes it fun, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, let's move on. We'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about that.
Sure. So Matt also suggests they head over to Father Callahan for some holy water because, having a priest on the team probably always a good thing when you're dealing with vampires.
Sounds good.
But they ask Matt what kind of person Father Callahan is, and he says, a little strange, a drunk, maybe. If he is, he's a literate, polite one, perhaps chafing a little under the yoke of enlightened popery. God, I love Stephen King. But then Susan responds, are you sure that Father Callahan that he drinks? Susan asked, her eyes a trifle wide. I think Susan's reaction to this is so interesting. And there's a lot you can read into here if you want to, and I want to do that with you.
Yeah, I mean, I have my take. I'd like to hear yours as well.
Yeah, sure. You go ahead.
So, I mean, it would be especially odd that she be like surprised and worried about that, and yet not realize that Ben has this exact problem. And then I'm like, well, maybe I shouldn't say odd, because that's exactly the point that King is making here, is that she is perfectly blind to Ben's flaws, and she like aggressively keeps herself blind. Like, this is why she reacted with hate when her mom told her about Ben's wife. So this is just like re-emphasizing how blind she is to anything that's going on with Ben in a negative way.
Yeah, that was my read as well. I kind of want to carry it a bit more forward and say that, like, this is partially her perhaps realizing that blindness a little bit, like this idea that she knows that she's been told that Ben is an alcoholic and was drunk when he killed his wife and has this problem that she hasn't seen. And then someone just matter of factly points out another person in town that she knows that has this problem. And she's like, what? Mm-hmm. Like there's this real moment of like, does he? And that scares her. I mean, like her eyes are wide, right? Like her eyes are wide learning this. This is a shock to her.
Yeah.
And so I think the shock is, it almost seems like too much of a shock for her just because it's Father Callahan. Because it doesn't seem like Susan knows Father Callahan very much. I mean,
right.
She didn't have a crucifix of her own. I don't know if the book has told us what religion the Nortons are, but even if they are Catholic, like doesn't seem like she's super Catholic. And so I read into that shock some of the subtextual realization of her blindness to Ben's flaws a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's too big of a reaction to be justified by just like, really? The Catholic priest drinks alcohol? Like, no, it's, but it's interesting because her father also drinks too much.
Yeah.
But I think it's very interesting the way she does the little rephrasing there, because Matt says he's a drunk, which is like a pejorative way of saying he's an alcoholic. He has a drinking problem. He drinks too much. He's addicted to alcohol. Like it's a severe word. And she says, are you sure Father Callahan is that he drinks, which is a way more like polite and decorous way of saying in a way where hey, I drink. Scott, you drink, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody drinks. Everybody has a beer every once in a while, or 2 every weeknight, or 5 every weeknight, or everybody drinks. So like it's it's almost a sign of like the way that like her existence and maybe even her family is kind of in this cycle of like justifying away how much you drink.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a good point that small change says so much about her that she can't even bring herself to say the word drunk. Mm-hmm. And like she can't say it about her Ben. She can't say it about her father. She can't say it about Father Callahan. Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on there. That's great.
Yeah. Cool.
So regardless, we now understand how Callahan might possibly be inducted into our vampire slaying Ka-tet, don't we? I mean, this is one thing that coming into this book, we have a unique perspective coming from Dark Tower. We know Callahan will be involved with this group at some point, somehow. And we can kind of see the path, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I predict that we'll see him next week. That's my guess.
But this scene ends with Dr. Cody blissfully unaware of everything that's going on, at least for the next few hours, coming in and doing a quick checkup on Matt. And we get this beautiful moment here. They smiled at each other, the way young couples will when they are in sunshine, and there's nothing seriously the matter with their works. And the smiles faded almost simultaneously. For a moment, they both wondered if they might not be crazy.
Yeah, it's little details like this that really separate King from the pack for me.
Yeah. And I mean, isn't it such a great metaphor for their whole relationship, right? Where like on the surface, it seems really good and happy and young couple smiling at each other, but there's this darkness underneath. And it's a literal darkness in this case, but also a metaphorical darkness of Ben's past and the how much his past is ruling his actions. It's really great.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's when it comes to young couples, you can get a lot of like positivity just out of the momentum of like, young couple emotions and neurochemicals, to be reductive about it. But yeah, there's a lot working against them, and that's seeping through here.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so we move on to Dr. Cody coming to check up on Ben, and Ben uses this checkup as a way to finally tell Jim Cody everything that's going on. And before we get into their conversation in general, one of the things I wanted to talk about that I don't think we've talked about very much in this book so far is the way King is using the passage of time to increase tension. Now that we know that it's vampires, the day-night cycle becomes really important to the story. And it brings on its own stressors and tension, and King constantly makes us aware of it. Here, in this moment, before we get into Cody's reaction to the news, we see this line. it was 10 past noon when they had finished telling everything. And so if you're like me, you read that, 10 past noon, and you're automatically going, okay, 6 hours, 7 hours before dusk, before night, before danger. Mm-hmm. And he does this constantly throughout this chapter, where he'll constantly have the characters be reminded of the time up until we get to the moment that concludes the chapter, the 7:02 moment of actual vampire hunting. I think it's just a great way of just subtly ratcheting up that tension.
Yeah, absolutely. Just we've moved into the domain where hours matter, actually. Mm-hmm. And they're doing what they can, but I think it's like when the end of the chapter comes around and they actually realize kind of the level of danger that they're actually in, you almost, like, in retrospect, you're like, oh man, they should have been moving a lot faster during the day when they had the chance.
Yeah. It's great.
Yeah.
There's some, like, the reason I love vampire stories is there's something so wonderful about this idea of, like, safety in the day, danger at night, but, like, you can't stop the progress of time. Like, time itself becomes a weapon that you can use, or a weapon that can be used against you. And I think it's such a great way of including the inevitability of time in a story about immortal vampires and nostalgia and things that don't change. It just slots in so perfectly, I think.
I like that. That's cool.
So here's Dr. Jimmy Cody, and here's his reaction. I love, he's told this crazy story, and here's his reaction to the news, Matt. I think, you were talking about how this stuff hasn't gotten dull and boring yet. And I think it's stuff like Cody's reaction here, because his is so damn practical. Like, he starts off explaining why he's taking this so well by asking a simple question. Do you know how aspirin, or Aston, if you were Roland Deschain, works? And he says, neither do I. Neither does anyone else. But it's good for headaches and arthritis and the rheumatism. We don't know what any of those are either. Why should your headache? There are no nerves in your brain. We know that aspirin is very close in chemical composition to LSD, but why should one cure the ache in the head and the other cause the head to fill up with flowers? Part of the reason we don't understand is because we don't really know what the brain is. The best educated doctor in the world is standing on a low island in the middle of a sea of ignorance. We rattle our medicine sticks and kill our chickens and read messages in blood. All that works a surprising amount of time. White magic. Bene Grisgris. Is that how you pronounce that?
I don't know. I don't know that phrase, actually.
Neither do I, actually. My med school profs would tear their hair out if they could hear me say that. Some of them tore it out when I told them I was going into general practice in rural Maine. One of them told me Marcus Welby always lances boils on the patient's ass during station identification. But I never wanted to be Marcus Welby. So this is how he's kind of explaining why he's just rolling with this thing. That here, the doctor who you think would be the hardest one to convince is the easiest one, because as much as he understands about medicine and the human body, he recognizes all the insane things about it. And it's a wonderful moment.
Yeah. Dr. Cody's awesome. I was sort of trying to joke a minute ago that, like, it's weird that he's so accepting so quickly. But I mean, I think King's just acknowledging something that we sort of saw firsthand in the answers to the discussion question last week, which is there is a wide variety in terms of people's dispositions and private notions about how the world really works. And Dr. Cody is a different person than we've encountered so far. He is your classic man of science who knows exactly how limited science actually is.
Yeah, of course, I would say that our understanding of a lot of the things he's talking about have increased a lot in the 40 years since this book came out. Yeah.
I mean, that's true, but I think we're in a sense no closer to solving certain fundamental questions, which, here's a great example to connect what you just said, actually. So I've seen a couple of interactions recently, like this last couple of weeks, where people were really quick to just totally dismiss the idea that UFOs could possibly be aliens with really, really high confidence. Just like, no, it's totally, totally impossible that they could be UFOs or that they could be aliens. And that's sort of fine, because, like, I think they're probably not aliens, and I think they're, like, pretty confident they're not aliens. But the reasoning that rests entirely on, like, well, physics doesn't work like that, that doesn't work for me. Like, excuse me, like you're awfully confident in the 2021 state of physics, which doesn't explain dark matter or dark energy and doesn't explain how gravity really relates to quantum fields in any way. Which all of which it's like, okay, I can buy not thinking the UFOs are aliens, but if your confidence is due to the fact that you think that we understand science really well, I don't think that's actually all that supported. So anyway, I appreciate and to some degree actually align with Dr. Cody's perspective here.
I love that. That's great. Yeah. I think that's what's so fun about this is that you're absolutely right that if you had asked anyone which of the characters is going to be the hardest to convince, I think anyone would have said the scientist. But it's almost as if, like, I forget what that saying is, but like the more you learn, the more you recognize that you don't know. And so a person who studies science is more aware of how little we understand about the world than a person who doesn't. And that's the slot that Dr. Cody finds himself in this book.
Yeah, it's very fun to have this sort of character here.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be really important to kind of see how the story treats the man of science, because I have not reread Bram Stoker's Dracula. I'm going to do that before our final episode on this show or in this book, I promise, because I want to have a conversation on the differences and the similarities. But I will say that one of the things that Bram Stoker is doing in Dracula is showing the success of modern technology and modern scientific understanding to defeat these unknowable things. And I mean, we don't know what's going to happen to Dr. Cody in this story, but in this, it is interesting in this story that it is the science and the technology that is most willing, at least so far, to believe in the mystical and the ununderstandable, right, the irrational.
I kind of want to take a little sidebar here, because it's not like this book is over, so we can't really say how science and technology is going to fit into this story. But my feeling at this point in the story is that, like, King is not continuing on Bram Stoker's vision and theme of saying, yes, science and technology is the torch of human enlightenment and it will burn away the darkness. I think he's kind of saying, like, yeah, we used that torch, it burned away a lot of darkness, but there's always darkness. And just because you have your bright little camp in the middle of the woods doesn't mean that you can illuminate the forest that's all around you.
Yeah.
And so the vampires are still out there in the darkness, and they still are going to find a way in. And so I think he's a little bit more kind of, dark and defeatist in that way.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, we'll see how everything plays out. I will say, like, based on our Dark Tower knowledge, I think this is one thing we can kind of use that knowledge to hypothesize here, because if you look at that story, it's not that the story says that technology is bad inherently, but in the Dark Tower, it is the old ones and the technology driven old ones that cause a lot of ruin and destruction, that are the reason why the beams are failing, is the problems. Everything has to do with the old ones and their technology. And we see again and again the way technology plays the antagonist in the Dark Tower. So we kind of get an understanding of how King views this generally. Yeah.
I mean, just the way he uses robots in the story, where they're often malevolent. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, well, a robot is like the apotheosis of technology. So.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. All right. So Dr. Cody decides to help out with the Glick Boy exhumation, and the two of them head over to his parents' house to get their permission. We don't get to see what I'm sure would have been an incredibly awkward conversation with Danny Glick's parents. Uh-huh. We don't get to see that happen because the Glicks aren't home, because one of them has died. They meet up with Pauline Dickens, the neighbor of the Glicks, and she informs them that Mrs. Glick is dead and her body has been sent over to a funeral home in Cumberland. And that's because the Salem's Lot funeral director is he's missing. He's missing.
There's just a lot of problems.
Yeah. It is interesting. This is one of those things where we've been talking about this telephone wire highway, information highway in this book, since the beginning. And it's interesting that this works in Ben and Cody's favor here, right? Because it's like in a big city, you maybe don't get a nosy neighbor that knows exactly where the body is sent, right? Uh-huh. Like we learn here, actually, like specifically that the reason Pauline Dickens knows exactly where Mrs. Glick's body is being sent is because she calls up Mabel Wirtz, and Mabel Wirtz knows already, because of course she does.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's really interesting the ways in which like we see this is an advantage of the small townness. It gets them information quickly, and so they can head up directly to where Mrs. Glick is being stored.
Yeah, it's almost like the town is protecting itself in the only way it can, using this, this nervous system that it's developed.
Yeah, interesting. And it's interesting because we've seen ways in which this information highway can spread information, but also hide it. It's just like this kind of juxtaposition of two different sides of this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Mabel Wirtz is an interesting kind of linchpin, because you can imagine that she right now, I'm going to keep pushing on this metaphor until it breaks. The text said she is the town in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So she's gonna protect the town such as it is. But at a certain point, the town is going to be Vampire Town, at which point she'll probably become a vampire. And then if as a vampire, she's still capable of using a phone, then things could turn in a much worse direction very rapidly, right?
Oh, I love this.
I mean, just imagine, like this is maybe a very different story than the one that we're writing here, but like imagine like the town gossip is a vampire and just like uses her ability to kind of push and pull people around to get them into situations that are compromising.
No, I like that. I like that a lot. I guess I'm trying to construct an idea here around one of the dangers of being a small town of gossips is this assumption that you know everything about everyone, right? Mm-hmm. Because so many people share so many things, there's this general assumption that all information is shared amongst all people. And we've seen textually in the story that is not true, that there are secrets that are shared, but there are secrets that are not shared. And I wonder if part of what King is exploring here is this idea that like when you have this small, close-knit community, those secrets actually fester even more because of the assumption that everyone knows everything. So you don't think anyone's carrying secrets. Like in a city, everyone has secrets and nobody knows what the fuck's going on with anyone because they don't know anyone. And so like it's just not as important. But in this, like when you assume you know everything about someone, but you don't know anything actually.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I mean, city folk are going to be more guarded by default. Mm-hmm. And these people are going to be more trusting by default because they think, well, why shouldn't I trust Bob? I've known Bob all my life. And you don't realize that Bob is a vampire now. So,
Exactly. We got this line here too that I wanted to focus on for a bit. If I was a superstitious person, I'd be afraid. Afraid of what, Pauline? Cody asked. Oh, things. She smiled vaguely. Her fingers touched a small chain hung around her neck. A St. Christopher's medal. So let's talk about this for a bit, right?
Yeah, it's fun to imagine that there might be some people in this town who survived this whole thing just because they literally always thought that vampires were real and had basically been waiting for this day.
Sure.
I mean, no, I know I'm kind of over interpreting that, but I mean, just it's sort of a seemingly religious person who actually already has their head in the right place, even though they haven't seen nearly as much evidence as Ben has.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the beautiful writing at the beginning of chapter 10, where they kind of talked about like the town knows darkness, and when the darkness fell upon the town, it greeted it as if it was a long expected, friend, right? Like, this is just like there are going to be members of this town that look at what's happening to it and just say, oh yeah, that fits, that works, I got this. And Pauline becomes like a stand-in for a portion of the populace that is just cognizant of the weird thing that's happening here, and yet is not doing anything about it, right? Like we have our Ka-tet of vampire hunters that seem to be the only ones actively working to solve the problem, and we have a woman here who seems to be bought into something supernatural happening and is not doing nothing.
Yeah, well, there's a fun kind of denial happening, because once again, it always pays to dig into the actual text. She says, if I was a superstitious person, I'd be afraid. And then she touches a magical St. Christopher's medallion. So she is a superstitious person, obviously. She obviously is a superstitious person, which means she's afraid.
Yeah.
She's telling them she's afraid of creatures of darkness. She's actually thinking about this. It's not just a hypothetical for her, right?
Yeah, totally.
It's just a fun way of framing that, because the character doesn't say like, I'm afraid of monsters. She won't even maybe let herself think that in those words, but that's clearly what's happening here.
Yeah, I mean, it's another example where we talked about how if Matt ever said anything out loud about this, he'd be run out of town. And I think Pauline is probably just as afraid of that, of actually stating the thing that she's thinking. And how many people in this town are thinking some form of this, but are so afraid of the gossipy, destructive nature of this small town to actually voice the thing that they're thinking.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. Yeah. They're if they're going to say it, they're going to say it in some kind of deniable way, like Pauline does here, but that nobody wants to stick their neck out. And get ratioed. Yeah.
God, why do you got to bring Twitter lingo into it?
I mean,
someone's going to be listening to this podcast 30 years from now and hopefully doesn't get that reference. Right. Please, God.
Well, the reason I bring Twitter lingo is because it's a perfect analogy. The idea that like everybody on Twitter is constantly afraid of the mob piling on them, right? And
yeah, that's true.
And that's the same dynamic that's happening here. It's a toxic social dynamic, which is Twitter.
Yeah, stay off Twitter, everyone. Yeah. That's our advice for the week.
Yeah, right.
All right, so their plan busted. Ben Mears and Jim Cody decide to do the next one. They go by to hang out with Maury Green, who is the Cumberland funeral director. They're going to pay him a visit and ask to get a look at Mrs. Glick's body. I like this part here. Before they go on to do that, there's this small beat. He remembered the call he was to have made to Father Callahan, but it would have to wait. Things were going very fast now, too fast to suit him. Fantasy and reality had merged. So what do you think about that? That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of harkens to what I was saying earlier, where like I think Ben, maybe 95% believes in all this, but he doesn't believe it in his viscera. Like it's not motivating him the way it really would. Like if you, I don't know. I'm trying to think. Like if you thought there was a bear like in your basement or something, like you wouldn't like go about like consensus building with your neighbors to like talk about how to deal with the situation. Like you would be extremely fast in your reaction, much faster I think than Ben has been, because I think part of him has not really taken it seriously. The things are moving too fast now, because it's like now it's not theoretical anymore. Now it's not kind of a fantasy where they can they can continue to talk about this and strategize. Like, no, they're already behind the 8 ball. Yeah. And he's just realizing that now. So in this metaphor, Father Callahan's like the bear catcher. Father Callahan is the bear patrol. And he has the rock that keeps bears away. Yeah. And I mean, in any other situation, you would call the bear patrol first, not head on to the bear preserve to see if there's actually a bear there. Yeah, not just like stick your head down there and be like, hello? Is there a bear? Hello? Bear? Yeah, right. Can we confirm that there's a bear here? Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, that's the thing is like, the thing that the last chapter did so beautifully is kind of demonstrate to us, the reader, how behind our good guys are, that while they were in the hospital, the vampires have basically taken over this town, and they exponentially expand, right? Like this is the whole thing, that one vampire can make a bunch of vampires, and then those vampires, it's a vampire pyramid scheme. And our characters are already really behind. Yeah, they need to pay more attention to exponentials. So on the way to the funeral home, our two chat about the reality of their situation, and Jimmy Cody gives another great speech that endears you to him as a character. He actually makes us fall in love with him specifically because he answers the discussion question from last week. It's like so much so it's almost as if I planned it that way. Huh. Did you? Yes.
This is beginning to seem like a paranoid's dream, Jimmy said, or a Gahan Wilson cartoon. The scariest part of this whole thing, from an academic point of view, is the relative ease with which a vampire colony could be founded. Always if you grant the first one. It's a bedroom town for Portland and Lewiston and Gates Falls, mostly. There's no in-town industry where a rise in absenteeism will be noticed. The schools are 3-town consolidated, and if the absence list starts getting a little longer, who notices? A lot of people go to church over in Cumberland, and a lot more don't go at all. And TV has pretty well put the kibosh on the old neighborhood get-togethers, except for the duffers who hang around Milt Store. All this could be going on with great effectiveness behind the scenes.
Yeah. So as you can see, the social decay of the late 20th century has led directly and inexorably toward towns being eaten by vampires, which is why you should all vote Republican.
Now you're going to get ratioed.
Yeah, I know. Everyone understands my sense of humor at this point. If you've been listening this long, you understand that.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, this is great, right? This is exactly what we were talking about last week and what we'll be talking about at the end of this week's episode. This idea of this is the perfect place for what's happening here, because no one's going to notice until it's too late.
Yeah, that does make me excited to see what people say nowadays, because I mean, I think a small town is probably still a good target, actually, but
yeah,
I'm excited to see what other people what people suggest.
I do want to see a take on Bram Stoker's Dracula, or maybe even Salem's Lot in 2021, because a lot of this stuff has changed. Like I feel like small towns have changed in this 40 years since this book came out in a lot of interesting ways. The ways technology has changed small towns would be an interesting thing to explore. Yeah,
right. I mean, just the cell phone point you brought up earlier makes certain things a little bit more difficult. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see at the end of the episode what other people thought about Jimmy Cody's speech.
Yep.
I do like we've had a couple references throughout the story that I haven't stopped on, but like we have Marcus Welby in Cody's speech before, and then we have a Gahan Wilson cartoon, which are like extremely dated references that I don't think most people in 2021 would maybe get. Like I had to look up who Marcus Welby was. It was a sitcom about a doctor in the 60s, I think.
Yeah, I didn't get that reference. There's a reference later to like some sort of detective novel that I had never heard of, that I actually did look that up, and that's a fun reference.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, this is what King has kind of always done. He does it in all his stories. He peppers it with, it's not just the literary references we saw in The Dark Tower, but it's point in time references that kind of anchor you to time. And I'm sure the people reading this book when it came out felt the book anchored to their time as they read it. It dates it for us, but there's something, I don't know, there's something really enjoyable about it. Like I have said many times, I'm going through this chronological reread of Stephen King. I'm up to 2008 now. And it was remarkable, like how every book feels like a book of its time. And in ways that make it seem dated, sure, but in also ways that are, I think, really fun.
Yeah, sure. I feel the same way. Yeah.
All right. So meanwhile, we cut over to Susan Norton.
Mm-hmm.
Susan Norton, who still hasn't accepted that there are vampires in Salem's Lot and still thinks that her plan is the best plan. So she decides to do her plan by herself.
Uh-huh.
And as much as we chastise Susan for this decision she's making, I do like that the novel still gives us time to be in her head and kind of understand her thought process for this thing. Like, I love this line here. She was going to take positive action, and the thought was a tonic to her. She was a forthright girl, and now the events of the weekend had bewildered her, left her drifting at sea. Now she would row. So this is how she kind of psychs herself up for this.
Yeah, her ultimate choice makes us frustrated, but the build up to this has been hiding in plain sight.
Sure.
And I love that, actually. Like what we realize now in this moment is like, oh, she hasn't bought any of this. And the thing is, the whole time when she's been around Ben and the other characters, she's been visibly skeptical. She's argued with them. She's never really budged an inch on whether she like really, deeply thinks this is true. She's kind of managed to compartmentalize the fact that she found the ring in the bedroom.
Yeah.
she's only ever sort of given like token concessions to Ben when he demands like, don't say can't. She's like, all right, I won't say can't. But that's hardly persuasive to me as an argument. Like there's been no sign that she's really taking this as seriously as they are.
Yeah.
But no one else really notices that, and thus we kind of don't notice that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we started off the whole show of this book talking about the relationship between Ben and Susan, the finish your ice cream moment, you know, the moments in which Ben kind of overrules her or orders her or stuff like this, where he just takes her acquiescence for granted. He just makes assumptions that because he says it, she's on the same team,
right?
And she's on the same level, and Matt does it too. But I think Matt's just kind of going off of Ben's cue, and it's because they're not seeing Susan as a person with her own agency and opinions on this thing. They're treating her like a girl, right? They're treating her like a silly girl that it's true because we say it's true, that like, and that's it. And so this is what happens.
Right. I mean, basically it's like she stopped arguing with them, and so they assumed they had won the argument when in reality it's just like, no, she just got tired of arguing with you. And and she's, you know, she does kind of keep her own, you know, mind about things. So as soon as she's out of sight, she's going to do her thing.
Right. I mean, in this section, like King has us learn that Susan's pride and joy is the car that she has, and not because it's a particularly good car, but because it's the car that she paid for her by herself. We also are reminded of the fight she has with her mom, which has put the two on outs with each other. So they're just reminding us what type of person Susan is, or perhaps the type of person she wants to be. This forthright person who prides herself on her independence, on her ability to take control over her own agency, over herself. It is this super admirable thing to have, but no one is seeing it and acknowledging it, and so it's getting her in trouble. And I think the interesting thing about this is I don't think any of this is textual, right? Like there's not a line in this book that says, because Ben was ignoring me, I feel the need to grab my agency back and end up doing something stupid. But it's definitely there. It's just like she's kind of too love blind to notice the mistreatment. And it's not like he's not abusing her, but it's like this kind of low level dismissal. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it's I don't know. It's the thing where, you know, a young couple, they are just not communicating well, and they don't really understand where the other person's head is at, but they think they don't even necessarily think they do. They just like assume that the other person is the image that they have created in their mind, right?
Sure.
And so both of them have like a gilded image of the other person, which is not accurate, which is, you know, why Susan reacts with such just like rage when her mom, you know, puts a little stain on her image of Ben. And the same is probably true in the reverse, except with Ben, it's less like Susan has a golden halo and more like Susan is just this like comforting presence that helps distract him from the looming Marston house on the hill.
Sure.
But he kind of doesn't think about her that much. Like we've seen that. We've been in his head. We know that he doesn't really spend that much time thinking about her.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I guess I got a question here.
Yeah.
Why isn't Susan with Ben?
I don't know.
I mean, like we never see that part of the discussion, right? We have like, we talked already about how Ben has an assignment, Matt has an assignment, Susan doesn't get an assignment. And then she just goes home and then goes off on her own. And if they believe at this point that there are vampires in this town, it seems like sticking together as much as possible is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It seems like having her be alone in a house that might already have vampires in it would be a bad call. And we don't see any of Ben's it's weird how Ben's concern comes and goes. Like we start the chapter with it, we end the chapter with it, but nowhere in the middle is Ben thinking about Susan.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think that's sort of realistic actually, because like they have like young puppy love, but they don't live together. They're not really that big a part of each other's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And people are really creatures of habit, and so by habit he's sort of a loner, and
Yeah.
and so it's not that surprising that he doesn't really think of her. I think the fact that they're not together right now is just related to the fact that they haven't been taking this seriously enough. Even Ben and Matt, for them, this is still sort of like a theoretical exercise, a like, well, let's see how this all plays out sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
And they're not at the point of the movie where you have, taped a stake to a shotgun or whatever.
Sure. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't even think there's a scene in the chapter where like Susan says, I want to come. And Ben is like, no, much too dangerous for you. Like, I don't even think that happens.
I don't think that happens either. Yeah.
Yeah. It's wild. Like they go, the plan was to go to Mrs. Glick, Mr. and Mrs. Glick, and ask for their permission to exhume the body. Mrs. Glick is dead, body being taken away. The plan shifts. They don't reach out and talk to Matt. They don't reach out and talk to Susan about the change in plan. Like, the shift is another nail in the coffin of This Is Vampires. That, okay, now someone else has died.
Yeah.
Related to the first person that died. Like, it's another piece of evidence that they don't stop to think, okay, maybe we should reassess and meet up again. They don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It still feels pretty realistic to me, like to not react properly in the moment when things are already so surreal. But no, I mean, like from a strategic Monday morning quarterback point of view, yeah, for sure, they should have. They didn't even need to go check on the body at this point. Like, it feels pretty damn certain, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. So to Susan's credit, she still buys a gold crucifix and brings a stake along on her terrible mission.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what that's worth.
I want to talk about this section a lot, and I love the ways in which King demonstrates how absurd Susan feels by this whole thing. Like, this opening part of this is so great. She still felt absurd, but not half so absurd as she was going to feel if someone she knew happened to be driving by and see her marching up the road with a snow fence picket in her hand. Hey, Suze, where you headed? Oh, just up to the old Marston place to kill a vampire, but I have to hurry because supper's at 6. She decided to cut through the woods, and it's like, ugh. So her ability, her embarrassment and the absurdity she feels is continuously causing her to make bad decisions.
Yeah. She's just not taking it seriously at all.
Yeah.
Like the next line is like her thinking about like the choice of clothes that she made, and it's just her head is not in the game at all. Definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's wearing slacks and says very much haute couture for fearless vampire killers.
Yeah.
It's all a joke to her, and it's great because we start off at this extreme to one direction, and then we get to see it slowly change as she gets closer and closer to the house. That feeling of absurdity kind of starts to melt away, and it's slowly replaced by concern and outright fear. And she is nice enough to point out to us here that she's behaving just like those silly heroines in horror movies who always go into the room, down into the basement, up the stairs when they should be going back. She points this out, but it doesn't allow her to stop. She feels that fear, but then she shakes it off. She says, "You've got to stop being stupid," she told herself. "You're going to go up there and spy the place out. That's all. From the front yard, you can see your own house. Now, what in God's name could happen to you in sight of your own house?"
Yeah. I mean, she literally thinks exactly what we're thinking, and then she dismisses it as childishness and goes ahead with her plan, which is really kind of great.
Yeah, I mean, I love that idea of what in God's name could happen to you in sight of your own house, right? This is I think this is, and I don't know if the timing lines up correctly, but there was this shift in the country around this time. I think it has to do with Watergate and all these things happening, that we became less trusting in general, and this idea that like we have this idea that like you're in your safe suburban house, you're safe, like especially if you're in a small town it's safe. It's safe here. This is what America is. It's safe. And I think, you were talking about at the very beginning, the absurdity of the amount of bombs going off in the country in the early 70s, that it was not a safe time in our country. And this feeling, this destruction of this feeling of security and safety when you're in a place that should be safe, your home, within sight of your home. I mean, like to the Gliks, the same thing happened. They were in sight of their house. They were just in the woods right next to their house. Like this is the destruction of the concept of safety of your home.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. I mean, I also, it's funny because I love everything you just said. I kind of took that last line a bit differently, because I was like, well, I mean, most people die in their houses, like either just when they get old and they die, or in a household accident. I've also heard that that maybe this is, I'm probably going to mangle the truth of this, but I've heard something like most terrible car accidents happen close to home, because you're like, well, I'm almost home, and so you stop really paying as much attention. Or you hit a pedestrian or something because you're like, I'm almost home, so it's like, yeah, all kinds of terrible shit can happen within sight of your own house. What are you talking about? Yeah, you can fall off a ladder putting up Christmas lights and you're dead, and that can totally happen. That kind of thing happens every day. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's the place you spend the most amount of time, so naturally, statistically, it's going to be most likely the place that you die.
Right. So it just struck me as a sort of childishly, just childish way of this, of like, oh, I'm safe because my house is nearby. It's like, no, what are you talking about?
But I think this is part of like the idea, the 1950s idea of the safety and security, and it was all bullshit to begin with, right? Like it was never true. It was never. It was a bunch of middle class white people like constructing a view of the world that was not an accurate one at all. And a lot of what happened in the 60s and 70s was the tearing down of this nonsense, and into the reality of what life is. And I think this is part of that for sure. Yeah,
just breaking that narrative, which she is seemingly stuck in, I guess.
Yeah. All right. So Susan is climbing up the hill. She can see the house, and she's looking at the house, and then Mr. Straker drives off in his car. So he's gone. So there's no problem. It's daylight out, so can't be any vampires, and Straker is gone. So we're all good, right, Matt?
It's all fine.
And then Susan feels someone behind her put their hand on her shoulder, and then we cut away.
Yeah, it's probably nothing though. It's probably just somebody going for a walk. It's like, oh, hey, Suze.
Yeah.
What are you doing out here?
Someone climbing the hill in the forest next to the Marston house.
Yeah.
Just casually for no reason.
Silently stalking her. Yep. But just to make it, it's a joke though. It's like, wouldn't it be funny if I just snuck up on Susan?
So we leave Susan for dead and cut back over to Ben and Cody waiting in the funeral parlor. It is now 6:47, Matt, sundown in 20 minutes. We learned that Mari Green, the funeral director, owes Jimmy Cody a life debt for saving his son's life years ago, and that favor is being cashed in here to ask the weird request of, can we hang out with the body of Mrs. Glick without you here? It's a totally normal request that Mari is just like, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
thanks, Mari.
Yeah, Maury's another fantastic Kingside character. I love him. Just a great example. There's so much personality crammed into a couple of pages here.
Yeah, you don't have to do it, and yet he does, and I think the book's better for it.
Yeah, right. I love just like I don't know, just so many sort of like unnecessary but wonderful details where he's like this, he like laughs off the idea that like just asking for this would be considered like a fair trade for the saving his son's life. It's like, no, I owe you so much more than that. And it's like, maybe the story will do something with that, but then again, maybe that's just like the only time we hear about that. I don't know, but either way, it's fine.
It is rather humorous the way he downplays this incredibly weird request to just hang out with a dead body alone.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I was in his position, I would assume that they were looking for some kind of sign of disease, but they didn't want to start a panic. I think that's
sure. I mean, the only reason this succeeds is because of Jim Cody. Like, he, not only because of the debt that Green owes him, but he lends an air of credibility to the whole thing. Right. If this was Ben and Matt attempting to get a look at this body, people would think they're insane.
Yeah.
or perverted. Yeah. But yeah, having a doctor here suddenly makes it look more credible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's 7:02, Matt. It's sunset, and Jimmy Cody realizes that they don't have a crucifix. Oops.
Uh-oh.
So he quickly makes one out of some tongue depressors and Red Cross tape, and then demands that Ben bless the crucifix to give it its power. And he tries to, and we got to talk about this, Matt. Mm-hmm. So here's what happens here. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Then he added as an afterthought, in the name of the Virgin Mary too. Bless this cross, and words rose to his lips with sudden eerie surety. The Lord is my shepherd, he spoke, and the words fell into a shadowy room as stones would have fallen into a deep lake, sinking out of sight without a ripple. I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me besides the still waters. He restoreth my soul. Jimmy's voice joined his own, chanting, He leadeth me into the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. What's happening here, Matt? Ben Mears is not exactly like a proud member of Team Christianity, right? And while I think both you and I, having been raised Catholic, know like pieces of this psalm, I don't think either of us could have recited it from memory in the way that both Jimmy Cody and Ben Mears do here. How did they suddenly get this skill?
It's from Maturin the Cosmic Turtle via the beam, obviously. I mean, it's also pretty interesting to see that even just crossing some tongue depressors actually works as a cross that, has magical powers here. So it does seem to be more about the faith than the exact details of the symbol. And when you think about the prayer specifically, it's just words, right? And we don't really know if it helps here, right? Like that's one interesting thing is there's nothing explicit in the scene that says like the fact that they say this prayer does or does not do anything for them. Maybe it helps, maybe not. We don't really know. But it does seem like there's something good. There's the white is at work here in some way. Obviously, almost.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely constructed in a way that it feels like he's started praying, is struggling for words, and then something fills him and it supplies him with the words. I mean, and then when Jimmy Cody joins in too, it becomes almost textual that they're being, something is channeling through them to lend power to this thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it could be. I guess you could view it as like the extra prayer is like maybe the blessing that they place upon the little tongue depressor cross that they make, and then that's what actually makes it effective. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know for sure. We see the cross begin to glow that eerie elvish blue light as Marjorie Glick begins to tremble and awake, and we don't know if it's glowing because it's been blessed or it's just the crosses glow when vampires are nearby,
right?
Like Bilbo's sword.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you're right that there's nothing textual in here that says that this prayer made it happen, but it seems if whatever power exists in this world, the white, whatever you want to call it, is channeling that mantra into them, it seems like it would be for a reason, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, something along these lines. I'm not too sure yet. I almost don't know if the book is gonna hold our hands here. Like
Sure.
I guess we haven't talked to Callahan yet. So if we're gonna get answers on any of this, it's probably gonna be through the Catholic priest character. But I just wouldn't be surprised if the book never really quite came out and said one way or the other like what is going on here supernaturally speaking. Like I don't think King like cares about that. Like
no,
King is not. I don't think one for like nailing down your magic system in a rigid Sanderson's laws type way.
No.
So we might just be left, trying to kind of figure it out betwixt ourselves. So.
Yeah, and I think it's fun to speculate on because I think it lends less towards what are the specific rules of this world and more towards what is this author trying to say thematically with these things. Like, it is much more interesting to me. What does it say about the world in which a godlike figure will, enhance your prayer when he sees that you need it, versus, just a guy holding up 2 tongue depressors and hoping,
Right. Well,
I mean, it says something.
It says something. And I mean, especially the white or God or whatever doesn't do anything for some dude who's just walking down the road, having just been busted sleeping with a man's wife, and then a vampire corners him. Like, there's no intercession there. There's only intercession if you like ask for it, basically.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
And then that also says something
to think about for sure. And then we see that Mrs. Glick here rises. We get this moment. A slow, choked voice spoke in the stillness, as grating as shards of broken crockery. Danny? Ben felt his tongue cleave to the roof of his mouth. The form under the sheet was sitting up. Shadows in the darkening room moved and slithered. Danny, where are you, darling? We've kind of mused, Matt, on how much these vampires are the person that they were and how much of them is like a demon or a monster that has taken up residence in their body. And in that regard, this moment, the moment of Mrs. Glick's rise, I think is really interesting, right? Her first words in her undeath are for her son. Her first concern is looking for him. Where is he? That's interesting, right?
It is, yeah. I don't know if I have a lot of evidence for this, but maybe it's like only the part of them that, or rather the only part of them that remains is the part of them that has been twisted and used to turn them. But I don't know, I mean, she clearly remembers her son, but she more than remembers her son. He is her first thought. She's looking for him, and that, that's the, I don't know. Yeah. It's interesting. Because I guess I wouldn't have expected like a mother's love to survive the transition into being a vampire, especially based on how just like obviously evil they've all seemed up to this point. So I have to wonder, like, where are we going to go with that? Like, are we going to see her again? Or are we going to see some consequence of the fact that she actually cares about her son? Because that just doesn't seem like a very vampiric motivation.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we don't know. I mean, I think we can kind of make assumptions based on, we heard Mrs. Glick talk about her dreams that she had, dreams in which Danny promised that they could be together again, like that, like this wonderful dream. And we can assume that was part of the hypnotism he put on her as he was draining her. And so maybe this is just like left over from that, where as part of the fulfillment of the dream is that they get to be together again. And so that is the motivating thing as she wakes up.
Yeah.
But regardless of what her primary concern is, her secondary one is eating Ben Mears and Jimmy Cody. Fortunately, they've got that cross. And we see a battle with a vampire go on here. Ben dipped it below her hand and then thrust it at her. An undulating scream came from her throat. For Ben, the rest took on the maroon tones of a nightmare. Although worse horrors were to come, the dreams of the following days and nights were always of driving Marjorie Glick back toward that mortician's table, where the sheet that had covered her lay crumpled besides one knitted slipper. I love when King does that. I love when King does this, like, there's going to be a lot of bad stuff to come, but this is the moment that our character will always remember.
Yeah. It kind of lets us take a breath while, it's like you get to the top of the roller coaster and you see what lies ahead of you for just a second,
Yeah.
Lets you take a breath just so that you can scream.
And in that breath, we see that Jimmy decides to jump onto the back of a vampire, but forgets that it's a vampire. And we see Mrs. Glick kind of throws him across the room easily. So we kind of already knew that they were stronger than the average human, but this is confirmation of that. Throws Jimmy across the room, jumps on him and bites him. And I wonder if, like, for a moment there, you were like, oh no, our cool new character.
I was like, shit, like, oh man, like this is getting worse really fast.
Yeah.
Luckily he doesn't, unless this is like a slow acting zombie sort of thing. He doesn't seem to bite it right now. So
Ben once again drives the house vampire back with his cross, ready to kill her. And then we get this moment. But even as her back pressed the narrowing wall, she uttered a high squealing giggle that made him wince. It was like the sound of a fork being dragged across a porcelain skin. Even now one laughs. Even now your circle is smaller. So what was your take on that line from the vampire?
I didn't know what to do with it. I mean, I guess it's possible that the circle being smaller refers to Susan in some way. I guess could be possible, but no.
If you have this Ka-tet of 4 people, then your circle being smaller means that we've just subtracted a person from it.
Yeah, but I like, even now one laughs is interesting because it's like who's one is one.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it could. I mean, she could just be talking about Jim Cody, who she just bit, right? Like, your circle is smaller because I just bit this guy and now he's gonna die. Or she could be talking about, like, one of us is laughing somewhere else, and we've just eaten Susan Norton. In which case, the vampires seem to be psychically connected to each other.
Yeah, I think I just assumed she was talking about Cody right here, but now I'm worried. So.
Well, don't worry, because I mean, Ben doesn't think anything of it. I think maybe he just assumes it's Jim Cody. Yeah.
Good point.
So then we understand how good old Hunchback Dud got out of a shack with a closed window and a door locked from the inside on it, because Marjorie Glick turns into a mist and just disappears.
Yeah, it's funny how many things I recognize as being classic vampire powers only after the book mentions them. Because, like, I mean, shoot, vampires are supposed to be able to turn into bats too. And that could, they could also be able to do that. Maybe he turned into a bat and flew out of the window. But I totally forgot about that.
There's just so many different things. I mean, like, if you go to the Wikipedia entry, it's like, it's got this, like, the most absurd chart in the world that has, like, every single vampire in fiction, including Count Chocula, and like their traits. Like, one of the things on the chart is what happens when they're killed. Count Chocula, by the way, turns into chocolate dust, if you wanted to know that.
That's I'm really glad that someone thought of this, honestly.
But yeah, I mean, it's so extensive. There have been so many different versions, and I think one of the things King is doing is kind of slowly rolling out what these vampires can do. And I mean, unsurprisingly, it veers very close to the Bram Stoker version of these creatures.
Yeah.
But Matt, Jimmy, as we said, was bitten, and he can feel the dirt and the grime and the infection and whatever is going on. He can feel it right away. He pours disinfectant on the wound and then takes a shot of a tetanus vaccine. It appears to work as they kind of test the cross on him, and it has no effect on him. It's interesting, we're in this world of supernatural, and it appears at least that there are some scientific explanations. I mean, if this stops the spread of vampirism, then it's a tangible thing that can be killed with disinfectant.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think the null hypothesis would just be like, if you get bitten and then you just wait a minute, then maybe it goes away. Or perhaps if you fervently wish to be delivered from vampirism, then you will be. Or maybe it was the fact that they said the prayer. Like, there's a few other things that it could be other than the disinfectant. But I still like the idea, like you just said, like having it be a material, a physical thing, not just a metaphysical thing, is interesting. I
mean, one thing we do know is that the vampires before slowly fed on people over the course of days, right? Like, the people didn't die overnight instantly. It's a slow process. Like, our understanding is that Mike was fed on multiple times over the course of at least 2 nights. And that, again, is another thing that is in line with the Dracula version of the story, that it's like it's a process. It's not one and done.
I mean, basically it seemed to be like they had to just actually lose so much blood that they died. And then they come back. Whereas he hasn't lost hardly any blood, really.
Yeah, but we'll see. I mean, there's plenty of versions of vampires in which a bite is a death sentence, and then you will rise. So
that's true.
We don't know. But for now, Jim Cody seems okay. I want to talk about this part here because I think it fits into a lot of our Dark Tower talk. We see, and while she was doing it, I liked it, Ben. That's the hellish part. I actually had an erection. Can you believe it? If you hadn't been here to pull her off, I would have let her. And so once again, we have Stephen King connecting sex with badness, right? With this idea of lust being connected to darkness and evilness, and it's interesting. This was around at the very, very beginning of his writing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think that is the same sort of thematic through line.
Mm-hmm. So then Jimmy punches Ben in the face to once again help concoct a reason to explain the unexplicable. So they're going to say that someone broke into the funeral home, knocked out both Ben and Cody, and stole the body of Marjorie Glick. Of course, it does seem a little weird that like Ben Mears keeps appearing at all these corpse parties.
Yeah, he's definitely making it seem more suspicious, right? Like the idea that we had talked about a while ago, that like maybe potentially there's some point in the story where the vampires could scapegoat Ben because of his outsider role, and they might even be successful in that.
Yeah, I mean the we don't know for sure, but it seems like that is a possibility that's being left.
I also think the fact that Jimmy's just willing to cold cock Ben in the face emphasizes that he's actually a pretty unusual dude.
Yeah, he's great, isn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, like, we haven't really talked about this directly yet, but I mean, we have the man of science, we have our researcher guy, we also have a man of faith lurking in the background. It's interesting the way in which we're collecting these principal people of each of these approaches.
Yeah.
To battle this thing.
Yeah, different people from all different sort of walks of life, but who all have this streak of something in them. And what is it exactly? I don't know. It could be a bit of the gunslinger in them. I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, but not an actual gunslinger, as we'll find out right now. Because, we're about to have this whole thing with the sheriff of Cumberland and not invited into the Ka-tet. But before we get there, I just wanted to point out that once again, King does his jump forward to jump back thing here. So we move on to another section, and instead of leading right off with the questioning of the sheriff, we instead jump forward in time to Ben back at Ava's past midnight, and then have him recall what the questioning was like, which is something that King does a lot sometimes. He likes to jump forward to then look at some certain events from the perspective of hindsight. And I mean, it's an interesting choice. I think what it does here is kind of immediately removes any of the tension of Ben like being arrested and accused. Like, we're not thinking about that as we go through this moment, because we know he gets back to Ava's just fine. Can you think of another reason why he would have employed that here?
No, not off the top of my head.
I think that's really just about it, though, right? I mean, like, I think it just allows you to look when a character is allowed to look back on something in hindsight. Maybe you can also point out some more things through their perspective than you would if they were just living through it real time.
Yeah. I mean, it allows you to slow down and be dispassionate. Whereas, I've struggled in my own writing with the idea that like writing something in a way that carries a lot of truth when it's an intense, emotionally charged moment actually is inevitably going to miss a lot, because like you get extremely myopic when you're in any kind of actual dangerous situation. And so, like having some kind of device where you can reflect back on things is super important.
Yeah. So we see that the sheriff named Homer McCaslin doesn't believe a damn bit of what these men are telling him. He doesn't believe it at all. And that's because their story doesn't make any sense, actually. They're saying it's some form of virus that they're checking for, and none of it makes any sense. They're lying, and he knows it, but he can't do anything about it. I love this part. Would either of you like to sort of revise your story? He asked quietly, and the backcountry twang was gone from his voice. This is serious business. We've had 4 deaths in the lot, and all 4 bodies are gone. I want to know what's happening. It's really an interesting commentary on things, isn't it? I mean, we're just talking like we have our man of faith around there. He's not part of the group yet, but we kind of know he's going to be. We have Cody, our man of science. We have our researcher man, our man of history, if we want to call him that. And Ben and Cody feel like they can't possibly involve the law or any central authority governmental figure in any of this. Like, they have to keep it a secret from this guy.
It is. I mean, I think this is another one of those moments where it's like, this is probably how you would react in real life if you had just had your ass kicked by a vampire. But I don't think it is a wise decision. Like, I think they could be like, all right, look, like, I'm just gonna, you could just kind of tell him the whole story from beginning to end and be like, all right, now look, you can arrest us, but number one, you don't have anything to arrest us on, so you should probably just let us go and continue to deal with this however we want, and then you go do your own investigation, and then you call us later when you realize there's vampires. Right. But like at this point, it seems like you would start trying to tell people, but I think that they're like terrified, right?
Sure.
Which he obviously, observes.
Yeah. And to be clear, I'm not saying that like they made the wrong decision or the book made the wrong decision by not involving this guy. It's just interesting the ways in which people are being excluded from the party and which aren't.
Yeah.
And what that is saying about the book. I mean, like, the idea that there is no moment in the story, at least so far, that anyone has said, we need a cop in on this. We need a gunslinger in on this. We need an authority figure in on this. We need someone who has possibly the power to round up an actual posse and do something. And I think they're right. I think if they told the story to this guy, as smart as this guy is, I think he would just call them crazy and move on. But I think that's the point the book is saying, that like that these things, these dark things, can operate with impunity in a system that refuses to accept that they exist, because it doesn't mesh with the image of the way the world works.
Yeah, I mean, you could, I like that lens a lot. Like, the idea is that maybe like institutional power can't do anything about this kind of thing.
Yeah. Because
if the sheriff starts talking about vampires, he's just going to lose his job.
Mm-hmm.
So what do? You only talk to people you trust. And then those people reach out to people they trust. And so it's a network of personal connections and humanity, but it has to be all out of sight of institutional authority, because, what I just said, the institutional authority would not function.
Yep.
Yeah. And
that allows the stuff to flourish.
Yeah.
But it just, I'm really paying attention to like which people are involved and which people aren't. I think it's so fascinating. Like, there's definite choices being made here around this stuff. And again, it is kind of reaching back to Dracula as well.
Yeah.
And the what the Ka-tet of Bram Stoker's Dracula looked like.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the conversation with the sheriff ends on this: you ought to write books with better sense, like the guy who writes those Travis McGee stories. A man can sink his teeth into one of those.
So this is the reference. I'd literally never heard of Travis McGee at all, but I looked him up and it looks like super fun, vaguely detective genre.
Yeah.
But like one of those things where there's like 25 books in the series.
Yeah, it's like the 50s and 60s kind of pulp detective novels, like hard case crime type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's not an actual detective though.
He's like a kind of a repo man for hire, actually. Something like that. It's very fun. Like, I was reading about it, I was like, oh, this sounds delightful. It's giving me all sorts of ideas.
Yeah, it's a fun thing that King loves those type of books, so I think he's having fun with this. It's interesting because like we've talked about how Ben is King and King is Ben, and so he's kind of critiquing himself in here by comparing himself to. I'm sure he's read and enjoyed many of the Travis McGee novels as well.
Right. No, I don't think this is like a cheap shot.
No, it's pretty great. All right, so we end this week's reading on this. He slept the rest of the night with the desk lamp on and left the tongue depressor cross that had vanquished Miss Glick on the table by his right hand. His last thought before sleep took him was to wonder if Susan was all right and safe.
Yeah, but not worried enough to call.
No, didn't call Mrs. Norton and say, "Hey, is Suze there?"
Yeah, she was supposed to be home by 6.
Yeah, is she there? How's she doing? Can I talk to her about the vampire I just fought? Like we literally, like, there's no more believing or not believe. I watched a vampire get up and I fought it, and then I watched it disappear into mist. Maybe I should let my girlfriend know about this.
No, she's just sleeping in her unlocked bedroom. Don't worry.
I'll tell her in the morning. It'll be fine.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm really like thinking about him just like lying there being like, oh yeah, shoot, forgot to call Susan. And then like thinking about like, oh, but it's so cozy in my bed. I really don't want to get up. I'll call it in the morning.
There's fucking vampires everywhere. What's wrong with you, Ben?
It's cold though. left my socks off. I have to walk on the cold floor.
Yeah, at least I got my tongue depressor that'll keep me safe. I'm sure Susan won't need one of those.
Yeah, right. Maybe the rule that the vampires follow is just like the bigger the tongue depressor, or the bigger the cross, the more damage it does. So like her little necklace cross is just not going to do any damage.
Yeah, I mean, you just might get a vampire that just like likes the stomach feel of the cross.
Yeah,
just it's like, yeah, bring it on me, lay it on me.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, we're joking around about this, but is this, under the authors of genius and everything is intentional line of thinking, is like King having Ben behave this way intentionally in a way that from an outside observer it goes, did you really not call Susan after the whole fight with the vampire? I don't know. Like, what do you think?
Oh, I definitely think so. I think there's a huge thread of like the stupidity of young people in love running through this whole thing. and like really, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm projecting, but that's sort of what you're supposed to do with fiction in a way that
sure.
like just you're full of all these grandiose thoughts about the eternal beauty of your love. And then, when you're young, you just kind of forget the other person exists for long stretches when they're not around. Like it's totally different. It's totally different from like living with someone, right? Because then it's like, that's like a person who's in your life. But when you're just like dating and you're just like the Twitter-pated chemicals are rushing through your brain, that I think that is the experience. Is it's like a dramatic mood swings, basically, right?
Sure.
I don't know. Am I talking sense here?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I even like when I first got married, I still remember times where I would like wake up and like my wife would be in bed next to me and I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah. Right. Right.
I forgot about her.
Yeah.
This is gonna be funny if it's like just an us thing and everyone else is like, what the fuck, guys?
No, I don't think it is. I think this is one of the many things King is great at, is like pinning down a thing that everyone does and everyone has thought, but it's sort of embarrassing, or like you never want to, especially when you're in love, you never want to like reflect on the fact that between noon and 6 p.m. yesterday, you didn't even remember that this person existed that you're now claiming you want to devote your life to. And like it's sort of embarrassing and ridiculous. And King is one of the rare people who's willing to like look at that in the face and have his characters exhibit that in a way that is going to get them killed. And you can't really ignore it.
I love that. I love it. All right. Well, that is it for this week's reading. We are done with chapter 11. Only 3 chapters to go in this book, but still quite a few pages. Next week, we're going to be reading chapters 12 and 13, 2 short ones. And I'm not going to tell you the title of those chapters, Matt, because it might spoil things for you.
Okay. So the title is like Vampire Kills Ben and Vampire Kills Matt. No? Okay. Never mind.
No.
Never mind.
No.
Right.
All right. We talked about Dark Tower connections a lot this week, so I don't think we need to circle back to it, but there's a lot going on. So let's move right into our discussion question. Last week's question was, if you were a blood-sucking fiend, hypothetically, of course, where would you want to set up your mid-level vampiring scheme and why? The answers to this question were just delightful. So thank you to everyone who submitted.
Okay, cool. Well, first we have from Midworld Lanes, hypothetically, well, if I were a vampire, what a silly notion. In the year 2021, I would certainly not be caught undead stalking around some backwater village. Despite Bram Stoker's mischaracterization, modern technology would be no hindrance to the Lords of the Night. In fact, if I, purely hypothetically of course, were a vampire trying to find suitable victims these days, modern technology would be an invaluable tool. I might, for example, seek out communities on the internet, which might be particularly vulnerable to vampiric depredations. But what kind of internet communities would those be, you ask? Well, perhaps while scanning social media, I would stumble across a podcast that asked their listeners what it would take for them to become vampires, or to believe in vampires. And perhaps in the replies to that delightful question, I would discover that the hosts and many of the listeners are rather skeptical thinkers, the types who say they could never, ever believe in vampires. And upon finding this community of oh-so-rational people, these people who the vampire could almost sink their teeth into without them accepting that what was happening was real, much less resisting, well, I think such clever and imaginative minds as the Kingslingers community can fill in the blanks for themselves. What could a tech-literate bloodsucker do with such information? Let's just say that Stoker never dreamt that the Count might have been able to dox Mina. Of course, it was only a fun hypothetical, nothing more.
Can we just pack it in and say we're done for the week after that one? Oh, absolutely delightful. Thank you so much, Midworld Lanes.
Yes.
That was just a joke, right?
Yeah, I'm not
Right?
I'm not concerned.
Yeah.
I'm looking at my window right now.
My window's behind me, so I wouldn't even be able to tell.
Well, good luck.
Next, we have ALH84001, who says, a small town is the worst place for vampires to assimilate. Everyone knows everyone else and is all up in their business. It's a guarantee someone is going to notice as soon as people start disappearing. We shall see how it works out for Barlow, but my plot, Spider Sense, tells me it ain't going to be all sucky with no consequences. For my part, I'd move into a house next door to the gang from What We Do in the Shadows. Those guys are hilarious. And as long as I was halfway competent vampire, I'd come off looking like Vlad Dracul in comparison. For work, I would start a podcast called Bloodslingers, where we discuss firsthand historical accounts with all my vampire buddies who have lived for thousands of years. Maybe an episode or two where we discuss vampire-related pop culture and how they get everything wrong. Then I'd watch all that ad revenue roll in by the truckloads. Am I right, guys?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You figure out how to get that ad revenue rolling in by the truckloads. You let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's... I think... I think that's a good plan, you know?
I like it.
Become a comedy vampire. That's better for everyone, really.
Yeah, those don't usually die horribly.
Yeah, honestly, like if you can pick what genre of story you're going to be in, you definitely want to pick like comedy vampire because otherwise, by the rules of genre conventions, you're definitely going to die.
Matt, have you seen What We Do in the Shadows, the TV show or the movie?
No.
Oh, my man, you gotta watch this shit. It's so good.
It sounds genius.
I mean, you love Taika Waititi. I don't know what you're doing.
I know, man. There's another one of those things. I'm going to write it down in a notepad file that disappears and I never see again. All right. Next from Mina Jen. They said, I think it really depends on who I am as a vampire. Lady of a castle overseeing a town full of peasants. Then the lot is perfect. Right now, me, a millennial in 2021, I'd work from home, preferably in a place with a basement, so anything below sea level is out. Probably in one of those satellite townships that is just outside a major city, close enough for robust nightlife, pun only slightly intended, far enough away not to be disturbed by the city during the day. And wait, that's where I'm living now. Am I a vampire? Have we all turned into vampires? Is this the truth behind coronavirus? Shout out to Lou for recommending the podcast. Thank you, Cy Lou.
Oh, thanks, Lou.
Yeah, I've had that thought as well. Like if you're the vampires, then you make up a pandemic, and then when everyone hunkers down in their homes, you just go house to house and eat them. Yeah,
no, we're not vampires because vampires still got to go out at night.
That's
and
true.
We stayed inside forever.
Touche.
Next, we have Domnambulist, who says, I would choose Amsterdam to settle down. One could enjoy the numerous clubs and bars, and in general, the pleasant nightlife. As a vampire, I would also take care of the tourist glut. Nobody would wonder if a few were missing. To establish the first contact between my vampire colleagues and their customers, I would run a restaurant that opens at sunset and is called Do Lunch or Be Lunch. However, it's a pity that the curry needs to be garlic free. A touristy area is smart because you could really play around with tourist murder.
Yeah, right. I believe that there were some actual serial killers who had very similar schemes to that were fairly successful at their murdering.
Well, this got dark.
Yeah, it did get dark. But, it's funny that we... we're talking about monsters that kill people and drink their blood. which is safe because it's fantastical, but it's a fantastical way of talking about things that are deeply disturbing and terrible, right?
Oh, certainly, yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think that's picking off tourists is a time honored tradition of murderers.
He says with experience.
Right. Bricks says, several years of playing Vampire the Masquerade has prepared me for this question in a way you wouldn't believe. First of all, the bigger the city, the better, at least as long as nobody else has claimed this city as their territory. Big city equals more victims to potentially eat without the fuzz getting any wiser. Yes, in this case, I'm from the 50s. Opening up shop in a New England small town is right up there as worst idea ever, Barlow. As for how I'd make a living, I'd find a business for which it would make sense that I'm only open at night. With COVID slowing down again, I'd say owning a bar or club would be perfect. My 50s vampire would probably go for a speakeasy aesthetic, making my anachronistic way of speaking and dressing a more easy fit. Another couple of obvious choices would be some form of IT repair or support service. Nerds are also very pale. Or opening an occult bookshop, complete with crystals and everything. Vampire hunters wouldn't think such a cliche would be an actual vampire. In my vampire game, we recently became the heads of a blood/sex cult, but I honestly wouldn't be charismatic enough for that. So somebody other than me are welcome to steal that once they get embraced by the darkness. P.S. Tremere did nothing wrong. I don't know what that means, but
it's probably a Vampire the Masquerade thing. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds very fun. Have you ever played this game?
No.
Neither have I.
It's like, I think there's video games, but there's also, I think it's like a tabletop game too. I'm pretty sure, because I remember my sister in her goth phase got a copy of the tabletop rule book.
Yeah, this sounds like a tabletop sort of RPG type thing, and that sounds very, very fun.
I don't think she ever played it. I think she just liked the image of her walking around with the book.
Yeah, I mean, that's being a teenager.
I can say this because I know she's not listening to this podcast and therefore won't get mad at me.
Yeah.
Sorry, Cindy.
Yep.
All right, next we have Baby Can You Dig Your Sam, who said, I'd go to a sleepy town in the Pacific Northwest and re-enroll in high school so I could find myself a moody partner to brood whilst I sparkle and hunt deer. Ugh. That's Twilight, if you didn't know, Matt.
Uh-huh.
If I want an easy in feeding off of humans that no one will miss, I'd probably run an extremely cheap hotel that caters to criminal elements in a city that doesn't get a lot of sunshine, like Pittsburgh or Seattle. If I'm looking for something more akin to Europe, I'd open a burlesque club in New Orleans. Lots of drunk Neanderthals with pockets full of cash to feed from. Lots of dark, shadowy corners to hide in, too. And the jazz music is great. Yeah, as someone who spent a lot of time in New Orleans, you could definitely eat a lot of people there.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, if there are vampires in the world, like I sort of do feel like they're in New Orleans.
Yeah, isn't that where the Anne Rice vampires hung out?
That's it. New Orleans? At least like 90% of the reason why I feel that way is because of the Anne Rice vampires. It's just such a good setting.
Yeah,
I want to set every novel there. Every novel should be set in New Orleans.
Okay. Yeah. From now on. All right. Salem's Lot now set in New Orleans.
Yeah. I mean, just think, guys. Wouldn't it be so much better? All right. Walking Dude 22 says, what would I be looking for to start my vampire village? That would depend on the overall rules of vampirism and my personal goals. The main question is, how does vampirism spread? If it is spread by the bite, then there is a geometric progression problem where the entire world rapidly becomes vampires. No, I think that even in Salem's Lot, a vampire has to be turned deliberately. Traditionally, this is done by the human victim drinking the vampire's blood. If everyone who is bitten turns, then it doesn't really matter where I go. If I have to choose who becomes my blood-sucking brood, then I am looking for a town with a nightlife. I would go someplace like Las Vegas, where the lights on the strip never turn off. Maybe I would buy a casino without windows. I can move about inside my business at all hours of day or night, luring my food with the promise of quick, easy cash. This is the ideal type of place because the people are also up around the clock. I think that Barlow and other vampires got caught out so quickly because he tried to establish a nocturnal undeath in a daytime town. Silly vampire lord.
All our listeners are really good at being vampires.
Yeah. I mean, so just like everyone's answers are great, but they're all optimizing, I think, for different things than what Barlow is optimizing for. You know, like we don't exactly know what he is, but like he seems more down with this idea of like corruption than just like getting a big tummy full of blood. And I think that's why he wants the small town. But yes, these are all still great answers.
Just imagining him saying, "My tum tum all full now.
Yum yum
Yum yum. Thank you." Complicated 9519 says, "I'll get this out of the way before the discussion question. There's a movie both animated and not animated called Blood the Last Vampire, and if I recall, part of the movie takes place with a vampire on a train."
Oh my god!
Wow, we got to tell Michael.
Genius.
"If I were a vampire, I'd probably set up shop in a normal town like I live in now, not big enough to be a city, not small enough to where you know everyone and everything. Then maybe I'd volunteer at the Red Cross blood drive or something. Would that work? If not, then I'd just be the creepy guy in dark alleys behind bars, waiting for closing time to gorge myself on drunk blood. Get drunk on dinner? Why not?"
I mean, that to me sounds like the most low effort path, which you'd probably get away with it too. So
yeah,
I think that would be the path I would take, honestly, because I don't really have the energy to do the whole like buy a casino and feed off of the. No, I would just kind of hang around and kill people opportunistically.
I wonder if there's a story about a vampire that like buys a casino as a front for their feeding, but then like gets really invested in the owning of the casino and doesn't want to use it as a front anymore. And like is now like, what do I do?
Yeah.
Like I need to eat.
Yeah, they really care about the business, but they have to like start other lines of business to try to get to
just eat people. Yeah. This is $1 million idea.
This is really,
we got to cut this out of the podcast so we can make it.
I agree. All right. Book Guyman says, "My thoughts on where to set up a vampire operation are probably too obvious. I'm just thinking a ginormous city like New York or Amsterdam or any city in China where I would have millions of potential victims without making too much of a dent in the population. If you think about it, Salem's Lot is a rather lame choice in location, considering that any single missing person is going to become the main gossip topic all over town before Ben even makes it back to Eva's boarding house. Plus, at the rate in which folks are being turned, there won't be any food left within a week. So, big cities seem the logical choice."
Yes, but does it matter if everyone knows if the person's missing? Yeah. That's what Salem's Lot asks you.
Yeah, the people always talk.
Yes,
as Straker said.
One other thing about I just want to Brooke drew us a comic to go along with this question that we posted on Twitter of you and me in a hilarious comic that I loved to death. So thank you for that, Brooke. That was very fun. If you want to see what we're talking about, check out the Kingslingers Twitter account. It's delightful.
Yeah, and then leave Twitter as quickly as possible.
Yes, of course. Only log in to look at the comic and then never come back.
Right.
Eric T says it all depends on the motivation. If the vampire wants to fly under the radar, opening an innocuous shop somewhere so people don't ask questions is the right move. Say Derry or maybe Sunnydale? Something like the Magic Shop, and they could name it, I don't know, the Magic Box? This is a lot of references that you're not getting, Matt, but you could get them. You could.
I'm just nodding and smiling.
If the goal is to cause sorrow and feed on psychological horror instead of blood, Barlow has the right move. The thing is accelerating at a stupid rate. It's more Ebola than COVID, which means it's a hot brush fire that has to burn out quickly. So an insular rural area where the infection can run its course is ideal. However, who is in charge of command and control here is not regulating the speed at a rate that there won't be people left before too long. So if the goal is complete conversion, one would set up near a transit hub. A bartender at any airport bar comes to mind, but probably far more conductive to a vampire's activity would be a bartender at a hotel very close to a hotel. Probably airport meant. The conversion to vampire seems to be a 1 to 3 day range, and posting up just down the road from LAX could have infection popping up in uncontrollable rates at nearly every corner of the globe within 1.5 weeks, which should be well inside the time any investigators could put the pieces together. Finally, if the goal is just sustenance by blood, as we discount being on the Hellmouth approach, the best may be to work as a low-level security guard working in either the prison system or an insanity ward that gets moved around every 2 months. Basically pull an Annie Wilkes. They are prey nobody will take seriously and has a high staff turnover rate. Eric has really thought this out.
Yeah, right. This is one of the, on the scale of the answers, I think we could say they go from like comedic to disturbing. And this is, I think this is the current winner for disturbing. So congratulations, Eric. Sincerely, really happy to have this quality of listener. Just
you're the best. Please do not kill us.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Steve L says, if I were a vampire, I would choose a small island to destroy. It seems like part of being a vampire is the game of fear and seduction. I guess all those centuries of regular feeding gets boring. Need to liven it up. So what better place than an island where everyone is stuck? Would be interesting to see who fights back and how and if anyone escapes. That or a cruise ship. I like that. That's fun. That's a fun little short story idea in my head that you've planted. It's
Like
really
the
fun
cruise
to
ship
think
one,
about. Yeah,
or
yeah.
the island.
Either one. Just the idea of, I think cruise ship actually I prefer, just because it's so unusual. It's like what a fun juxtaposition of elements, because you could, I mean, you could make all sorts of commentaries on like the culture of going for a cruise to escape your worries, and then a vampire being there.
It should be a vampire cruise. And then it's like, ha ha, we all dress up as vampires. And then one of them's just really a vampire.
That would be great. I'll get to work on this.
All right. Last, we have Zwan Song, who said, if I were a blood-sucking vampire, I would make my home base in a mid-sized suburb with rail access to a major city, not unlike where I live in the Chicago burbs. That way, the party doesn't stop when you have taken over and or fed on everyone in your immediate area. I'm assuming here that there's some inner vampire drive to keep creating more. Otherwise, why would a vampire like Barlow keep making competitors for its dwindling food supply? Put a few scout vampires in full sun gear in the morning commute. One getting off at each stop to explore the new environs, then sit back and watch the fun. Scout vampires. That's very good. I love imagining the full sun gear.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. This is one of the comedy answers, which I love.
Speaking of trains, how do you bring up a vampire on a train story idea and not immediately come up with Tracula? I know Scott is a new dad, so maybe the dad joke muscles aren't fully developed yet. Yeah, I mean, I'm ashamed. Well, I'm incredibly ashamed.
I have no excuse.
Yeah. See, the problem is, if it were this week, I would have come up with it, because Father's Day happened on Sunday.
That's true.
And I went full dad on Father's Day.
Uh-huh.
So I'm there now.
Yep.
And I would have definitely thought of this.
You got the grill.
Yep. I got the grill. I listened to a World War II podcast while constructing the grill.
That's perfect.
I don't have any New Balances.
Oh,
but,
well, shoot. Not
I'll
complete yet then.
Yeah.
I had an answer to this question.
What is your answer?
Scott, you know what a paper town is?
I do know what a paper town is.
But our listeners might not, so I'm going to tell you anyway.
Oh, well then no. Explain to me what a paper town is, Matt.
Paper town is, in the old days, or maybe even in the present days, map makers would put fake towns in their maps so that their competitors couldn't just copy their maps completely, because then if they did so, they could go to, the authorities and be like, look, like this town isn't real. The only way they would have this town on their map is if they copied our map. But then what happened was people who were using the maps to navigate would get to the location of the paper town and be confused, and maybe set up a little general store there, or maybe just coincidentally set up a little general store. Long story short, that location would become the name of the fake town, that there wasn't supposed to be an actual town there. So anyway, I'd go to one of these paper towns that's not really supposed to be there, and I'd eat everybody. And then when the town disappeared, people would just be like, well, there wasn't ever really a town there. It's a paper town.
How many people are in these paper towns?
I don't know, like 10 or so.
I guess, how many paper towns are there?
I have no idea. Look, it's
how long is this sustainable for?
I'm going to be one of those vampires who goes like 50 years between emergences.
How much blood does a woodchuck chuck? How much blood does a vampire need to eat on a daily basis?
I mean,
that's important. I mean, to this whole thing.
I think, like, that's the thing. Clearly, they can hibernate for long periods of time. So I think that it's all just elective. Yeah. It's all just like.
Is it like you need to recycle your entire vampire blood supply every day, or is it like a snake where you eat like once and you're good for like a month?
I mean, I honestly think there's a case to be made that it's more like the hunger, or like the lust component. Like that's how the Anne Rice vampires kind of think of it, where like they don't die without blood. They just get more and more kind of decrepit. But you don't actually like need it. It's just, but you want it. You have the hunger. You hunger for it. And so if you can hold off, then you can last longer.
Right.
I mean, it's really purely a sex metaphor. Like vampirism is absolutely a sex, which is funnily enough something we haven't really talked about much, despite the fact that King is also using it that way, where Cody had an erection when he's being bitten.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because yes and no, he absolutely is using it that way, but we haven't seen a lot of direct sex and vampirism in the story yet. Mostly because one of the main vampires we've seen is a child.
Yeah.
And so there hasn't been that opportunity yet.
Yeah.
But he certainly laid the groundwork for that.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
All right. That's it? Thank you so much. That was a fun one. That was a really fun one. I enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Next week's discussion question. Actually, this one comes from Matt. So why don't you read next week's question, Matt?
What is your favorite piece of esoteric vampire lore and why?
And it has to be something other than the fact that when Count Chocula dies, he turns into chocolate dust.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that one is already taken.
I'm sorry. That's mine.
But I mean, I thought of this literally because I was like, oh yeah, they can like turn into bats and stuff. I forgot about that. And I'm like, what other weird things, and apparently something to do with roses. I don't know. So yeah, please let us know and explain why you think it's interesting.
Yeah, totally. All right, folks. So that is it for us this week. Next week, as we said, we'll be back in Salem's Lot as we cover chapters 12 and 13. That's chapter 13 is the penultimate chapter.
Oh my God,
it's crazy. It's
Holy
crazy.
Shit. That's kind of surprising. Anyway, remember you can reach out to us at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And the subreddit is just such a lively place these days at r/doofmedia.
Yeah. You can answer the discussion question at all those places. And if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so and ensure you never miss an episode. We're on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and everywhere else. We're everywhere. Literally everywhere.
Mm-hmm. We're behind you right now.
Yes. Boo.
And if you like any of our shows and you want to support the Doof Network and Kingslingers, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. It really does help us out. And every day, just the struggle of deciding to sit down in front of this microphone, just seeing that Patreon count on there is really what makes me decide every day. So, just do your part is what I'm saying. Anyway, this week, new patrons, two Doof Troopers. We have Angie B and Justin B. Welcome. We also have Supreme Leader Doof, Crossland S. Thank you so much, all of you. We really hope that you enjoy what we are going to be giving you at those tiers.
Yes, just $5 a month can save a Matt's life. Exactly. Imagine sad music playing in the background.
Yeah, violins, piano.
We could probably hire Sarah McLachlan to do that for us.
Yeah, with all that ad money.
What else is she doing? Yeah. Of course, if you cannot afford to donate, that is always, always, always okay. You can help us out by sharing the podcast, talking about how great we are, or leaving us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. This week's Spotlight review comes from a Rosie Peach, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Well met, Sai. I'm too preoccupied to email. The series reminds me biannually that selfish love ends badly. A lesson everyone learns eventually." It's very true.
Wow.
A Rosie Peach.
What a poetic, short little piece of feedback. I love that.
Yes, I do too. Thank you so much for your review. And thank you everyone else who has taken the time. We just hit 300 ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts, which is pretty crazy.
That is.
Like, you only get a very small percentage of your listeners to review, which means there's a lot of you out there, and we love you all.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Except for the ones that maybe are setting up shop in our town and gonna eat us. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. And if you,
Eric,
if you want to skip over our house, then yeah, we absolutely love you. You're great.
Yeah, definitely. Just let me know where you're setting up your hunting ground, and I'll let you know which house to skip.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right, folks, we will see you right back here next week as we continue to make our way through an increasingly vampire-filled Salem's Lot. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.